All right, everybody. My name's Angelee. I've worked here at Chouinard's for about 2 years now. I graduated from OSU with a degree in agriculture. And I find my passion is really getting people excited about growing plants and food and learning more about it and figuring out that it's easier than you might think it is and a lot more fun than you might realize. Might find a passion. We've got people in person as well as on Zoom. So if you have any questions, feel free to just speak up, unmute yourself, or type it in the chat box. I'll try to keep a control on everything. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So we've got a huge topic to cover today. It's small fruits, which includes a huge number of things. I've taken about 8 or so of my favorite ones to kind of really explore. But before we get into the nitty-gritties of those specific plants, I wanted to talk about the plant basics, because the knowledge you'll find about the basics of plants can be applied to all sorts of different kinds of plants across the board. If you take these basics to heart, you can apply them anywhere, and pretty much, the nitty-gritties of each plant vary specifically, but in general, everybody likes kind of the same kind of thing. So some basics. One thing I really like to push is prevention is always key. Keep your plants as healthy and happy as possible, and they'll be able to fight off disease and pests better than they would be able to without it. And the health of those plants come from the soil, the environment, and your practices. We like to say right plant, right place. They're going to need their certain amount of sun, soil, and fertilizers. So keep realistic goals in mind and do not overcommit, because then you might see plants dying or being neglected, and you might cause yourself bigger issues in the long term. So all plants need mixtures of nutrients, waters, and sun, all in different amounts. More is not better of any of these types in most circumstances. They all like to have their own certain amounts. Plants are living things with their own preferences, so they're going to do what they want, not what you want them to do. Oftentimes you can think, oh, I want this to do that, and it'll just do the opposite. So it's a living plant, a living organism. Again, the health comes from your soil and your environment and your practices. Our job is to mimic its natural environment as much as possible, to keep it as robust and healthy as possible, as healthy plants fight off pests and diseases. I created this interesting little chart here to kind of help break down issues that you might see with your plants. I don't want to go too much into this, but if you're seeing webbing, tunneling, yellow dotting, that might be an indicator of pests. If you're seeing brown dead tissues, brown streaking, melting or white powdery, it might be a disease. And if you're seeing like legginess, which is overreaching, browning tips, or it might be due to what you've been doing to it or where you've placed it. And in the center, all of these things will cause defoliating, wilting leaves, and eventually death. It's just kind of a nice breakdown if you've never seen any of this before and you don't know what you're dealing with. Weather notes: our hardiness zone here in the Willamette Valley is about a 7 to 8. But we've all seen our weather changing pretty dramatically in the winters and the summers. We've seen very hot drought summers around here with severe freeze events in the winter. All this means for our plants is that it's going to add extra care for protection during these times, because we can't guarantee that our climate's going to stay nice and mild as it usually does. Our Willamette Valley native soils are found to be slightly acidic and high in clay content, which this high clay content means that the soil really wants to hold on to the water and nutrients and not give it to the plant. This can cause many issues, but we can work through those issues by adding organic materials to the soil to help break things up and let those nutrients and waters get to the plant. If you'd like to learn more about this, I would suggest signing up for our soils class coming soon with James Cassidy, the soil science teacher from OSU. It's going to be phenomenal. So all the soils are going to be different for different locations. I would recommend testing your soil, see what you're getting, what you're working with, or visiting this website, Web Soil Survey, because they have public information available to you that you can look and see kind of what you're dealing with in your area for soil types. The number one tool for prevention is going to be crop rotation. I really want people to take that to heart. It's true for long-term established plants as well as your vegetable garden. Plants use a different combination of micronutrients and macronutrients from the soil. And so when you switch them out, you can use different types, so you're not using just the same type every time. Additionally, it'll also keep pests on their toes, most notably with like tomatoes. We can see if you plant a tomato in the same spot every year, they're going to know to come back next year to look for tomatoes at that spot. Mulching is a really great for prevention as well, and planting properly at planting. So when you're planting, consider the mature size of the plant. Some of them can get quite large. Consider their lifespans and plan for that future crop rotation. Know your different soils. Like I said, our native soils are very high in clay content. This is going to be dramatically different from your potting soils that you'll find in a bag because they're made to be extremely well draining. And this is going to cause it's going to change how you're going to kind of deal with these plants. You got to keep that in mind. Remember to always water in plants to reduce transplant shock and follow instructions on packaging, especially for seeds. So when you're putting plants in the ground, we like to say, don't dig the hole any deeper than the pot in our area. This will allow, if you dig deeper, your plant will kind of sink in as the soil compacts, and it'll create a low spot for the water to gather, and it will create saturation and wet feet for your plant, which is all bad for our environment. So you're going to want to go no bigger than the depth of the pot it's in, maybe even shallower, which this is called mounding up, which will create a nice mound at the top of the soil, which will allow the water to kind of shed off and go other places from the feet of your plant, which we need in our wet winters. Take the soil from that hole, that native soil, and take half of it to amend it with different things that you're going to need for this plant. Or organic rich materials, or maybe acidic soil if you're planting blueberries or rhododendrons. In containers, you're just going to consider the root mass size. Too much soil can be bad as it's not used, it can contain bad bacteria or create bad bacteria. And too little soil means you're just going to be watering and fertilizing more often. What you're going to want to do is just make sure the roots are covered in the soil at the top, sides, and bottom. And most importantly, soil choice matters in container and raised bed planting. They get what you're giving them. They don't get to scavenge in our native soils. So investing in your soil it's going to help you in the long run. Raised beds, they can become depleted after vigorous use. So again, investing your time and money into your soil is going to help you and your plant in the long run. Mulching is extremely important for many different reasons: nutrient, water, weeds, pests, and diseases, as well as protection from weather events. You can use a variety of different things for mulching. We like to recommend at least 2 inches for most things, usually deep, of the mulch on top of the soil. You're going to want to keep it usually about 1 inch away from the crown, stalk, or trunk to avoid any moisture issues. And you're going to want to do that every year. When you fertilize, you're going to kind of rake it back, fertilize underneath of it, and then put it back over. Number 1 for prevention, right behind crop rotation. Okay. Tools for care. you might want to get these things in your garden shed to help you out. Soil amendments for planting to increase drainage, increase nutrient availability, and change pHs on things that want acidity or more basic. Like blueberries, they like it very acidic. Fertilizers, all plants are going to want to be fed. Tools and other chemicals you might want to consider getting are copper fungicide, which is great for most things treating during dormancy in the winter, because we see a lot of fungal diseases in our area because there are prolonged winters, prolonged springs, wet springs. So these preliminary sprayings of like copper fungicides or dormant spray oils are really great for things that you might see continual issues with. To prevent things, always clean your pruners before and after different plants. Always use fertilizers and chemicals as instructed. And don't be afraid to get dirty. Soil should smell nice, good, and fresh. If it smells bad, like a bad sink of dishes, that means it's gone anaerobic and it's got bad bacteria in there. And good dark soil is an indicator of good organic material. So get your hands in there, sniff it. It'll tell, getting in there in that soil will tell you a lot about what's going in there and what your plant might need. So feeding basics. A lot of plants are going to want to be fed, and soils can become depleted from repetitive or consistent use. There's like basically two different kinds, the granular and the liquid base from a basic point of view. Granular is a slow release and is consistently fed to the plant, whereas the liquid is instant and fleeting. Generally, plants aren't going to use this until the weather is above 55 degrees and they're actively growing. So feeding during the winter time is not necessary. It's normally that springtime when things are really starting to get going. Container and raised beds are going to need it a little more frequently than your native soils. And there's three big numbers that you're going to see on the bags of fertilizer. They're at the bottom every time, and they're going to stand for NPK in that order. The first number is going to give you an indicator of green growth. The second one is going to promote blooming, and the third one will promote overall health in the plant. So that's what those numbers on the bottom of the fertilizer bag kind of indicate. So those are the big three, but healthy soils will have more micronutrients than that. And again, I want to state more is not always better. Just follow the instructions on the packaging. Our areas suffer from too much water in the winter to too little in the summer. So fight winter saturation by mounding your plant, amending your soil at planting. Be mindful of placements and where water tables might rise for the winter, or where you have low spots in your garden. And raised beds or containers really help promote drainage if you're worried about it. For summer drought, drought tolerant plants, that's a good place to start. Drip irrigation is the most effective way to irrigate your garden. I also like sweat hoses because they minimize evaporation. They kind of, if you use a sweat hose, you'll only see about 2 inches of wet along the soil, but it'll spread out further and further as it goes below the soil level. So it cuts down on that evaporation. And mulching. Again, there's no rule of thumb for watering. Just get dirty. Stick your thumb in the soil, see how it feels, how many inches below the soil surface is it wet, and when does it start to dry. It'll give you a good indicator on what you're working with. I don't want to talk too much about this, but I really like this graphic mostly because of the max demand section here. It really shows you how effective drip irrigation is over sprinkler irrigation. Highly, highly recommend drip for multiple reasons. And that's one of them. Pollination, no pollination equals no fruit. In Oregon, we have tons and tons and tons of pollinators, over 300 native bees, as well as our honey bees. that we all love so much, which do a lot of pollination for us. I like to tell people to promote a natural pollination with a pollinator-friendly garden. But number one for pollinators, always use chemicals as directed. You don't want to be poisoning our bees. So here's a few easy pollinator-friendly gardening practices. Plant native pollinator plants. Bees go where the food is. Do nothing at all in the wintertime. Don't beat yourself up for leaving sticks off at the corner of your garden. Don't be beating yourself up for having bare soil. These are all great things for our native pollinators, and as well as drip irrigation, because a lot of our native bees live in bare soil underneath the ground. So pruning basics. Pruning is going to vary by different plants, the necessary steps, but overall, we're going to be doing it to keep things nice and clean, healthy, and productive. We're always going to be using clean pruners or loppers, and we're going to want to remove at the soil level or to the healthiest branch. Doing all of this will cause your plants to be more vigorous, robust, healthy, and productive. Make sure to be pruning at the right times. For flowering shrubs, sometimes it's right after flowering, so you're not cutting off the flower buds. But for most things, it's during dormancy of our winter time. All right, so now we're going to get into the nitty-gritties of the different plants. For each of these sections, strawberry, blueberry, gooseberry, we're going to be talking about the description of the plants, the soil, the planting requirements, what kind of trellising or pruning it might require, and some of the specific pests and diseases you might fight. So strawberries are very easy care, very versatile. They have small root zones, which means they don't require much watering, but pretty consistent watering. You can use them as ground covers, row crops in container gardening, raised beds, or even hanging baskets on the front porch.
You don't like 115-degree weather.
Yes, not without consistent watering. They're very thirsty. Their root zones are literally just very, very tiny. So if your topsoil dries that much, it's going to cause them stress. So strawberries are part of the rose family, the Rosaceae, which is why they're so fragrant, and they're deliciously edible. They're self-pollinating, which is really nice. They have a short lifespan of living only about 3 years for productivity. The breakdown of the plant is the crown, root, shoot, daughter plants. We'll look here. This is a nice breakdown of where the crown is and how you want to plant, not too deep and not too shallow. We want to go aim for the middle of that crown and pay attention to daughter plants, or runners, we might call them, shooting off. Pardon. So there's 3 major types of strawberries. We may be talking about June bearing, ever bearing, and day neutral. For the purposes of today, we'll be grouping in day neutral and ever bearing together because their cares and practices are very similar. So here's the difference between June bearing and ever bearing on strawberries. June bearing, you'll see bigger fruit, bigger yields. It'll only happen at one time, so it's just big, short season. I find that their flavors are very extremely strawberry. They're very delicious. For these guys, you're going to want to let the runners run and create daughter plants, because it's those next year plants that are going to be the most productive. While on everbearings, you're going to see a little smaller fruit, maybe smaller yields, but you're going to see a longer season throughout the whole summer. On the day neutrals, they'll keep going until it starts getting cold. So for these everbearing varieties, you're going to want to remove all of the runners from the mothering plant, because it's the mother plant we really want to encourage to grow, because she's going to be our most productive. These are varieties that you might see here at Chenard's at any given point. Right now, everything's in bare root, so it's gonna look a little similar to this. Act more accurately what's on the table right over there. Oops. Oh no. There we go. So planting requirements, thankfully these guys are pretty easy, but they're gonna want full sun. They're gonna wanna avoid frost pockets and low drainage points in your garden. Consider mounding again to kind of prevent the wet feet in our native soils. Practice good crop rotation. These are kind of shorter lived crops. So you're gonna wanna avoid planting with Solanaceae and other rosaceae. So that's your raspberries, your blackberries, your roses, or Solanaceae, which is your peppers and your tomatoes, because they share a lot of the same pests and issues. They're very hungry and very thirsty. And you're gonna wanna keep them clean by removing the dead bits and daughter plants when needed. Spacing is about 12 to 15 inches. So because they're very hungry and very thirsty, we would recommend soil amending at planting to help increase the drainage and the water availability and nutrient availability. Mulching and amending will do this. Watering, like I said, they have a very shallow root system, so they're gonna need consistent watering and to not let to be dried out. They have no deep tap root to kind of help keep it watered during drought. For feeding, you're gonna want consistency. June bearing, you're gonna feed after production to kind of help push them through dormancy and increase those daughter plants. On everbearing and day neutral, you're gonna want to feed April, May, June, just because they have such a long production period. Here's a few options to the right there of different fertilizers you may want to use. Strawberries aren't so picky. They're just going to be appreciative that they're getting fed, as long as it's not with an acidic fertilizer. No trellising required. You're going to want to remove the whole plants after 3 or 4 years. On everbearings, on day neutrals, you'll be, yes, everbearing, day neutral, same thing. June bearing is going to be a little different. So when you're pruning these in the winter, you're going to want to remove the old fruit, dead stems and foliage, and remove the unwanted runners that may have been left behind. Be aware of your runners. As I said, everbearing, day neutral, you're going to want to discourage these by, you can let them kind of set new leaves, but you're going to want to cut them before the roots set, and this will kind of discourage the plant from producing daughter plants. We want daughter plants on June bearing plants, so we're going to let them go and then thin them out later on in June. Oh, sorry, early spring before June. And then we're gonna mow to 2 inches to kind of clean them up. And this 2-inch height above the soil will save the crowns, but will clean up the foliage.
You stop watering them then?
Yeah, so when our rain starts, you can stop watering. So the biggest pests you're going to be seeing is from animals, deer, birds, and rodents. Physical barriers help a lot, or deterrents and repellents. We recommend using a smell deterrent for the whole area to kind of deter them from even coming close, and then maybe a taste capsaicin deterrent. So if they take a bite of your strawberry, it's spicy and I don't want any more of that. You might see some Drosophila, sorry, I can't say that very well, flies, some phylums and slugs. June bearing is less susceptible to diseases and pests because they've got that one production and then they're done, whereas the everbearings go all summer long. Mostly you'll see just powdery mildew, botrytis on the left strawberries, and you really want to fight this, you really want to promote good drainage and air and light circulation. If you really need the help, you can use a fungicide, but really through the good care it should be fine. A note for watering too is you're going to want to water at the base of the plant and not the crown. Again, that crown is very soft and susceptible to diseases and harm. So if you get the water on it, it might rot. So you want to go into the surrounding areas. And by avoiding water on that crown and the leaves, you will be avoiding powdery mildew as well.
I've had real good success with copper strips for keeping slugs and snails out.
Okay, good to know.
But it's good. In fact, I've got some old 3/8 and 1/4 inch copper line for like refrigerators and stuff like that. Smash that down and put it around, and that'll last decades.
Yeah,
Yeah, it works.
that's cool. Good to know.
It sets up an electrical field in their mucus. No, it's like an electric fence.
That's neat. Next, we're going to be going into blueberries. These are long-term perennial shrubs that live to be about 45 years old with good care. They provide year-round interest with their flowers, leaves, and nice red stems. There's 5 major types in the US, but we're only going to be focusing on high bush varieties because they're what we grow in our area. They're part of the Ericaceae family, which is like a heather heath. They go dormant in the winter. They really, really like sun. So that for the best production, they're going to want sun. And they require upkeep for production as they start to lose productivity at like 6 or 8 year old branches. So pruning is very much necessary. You're going to want to choose your varieties based on either their mature size, their flowering fruiting time, or their taste. They're very prolific producers, and you may want 2 to 4 plants per person in your home, depending on how much you like blueberries. So make sure it's going to fit its location. A lot of them can get very large. Consider spreading flowering times out from mid, early, and late. Because then you can extend your fruiting period. You can have berries all summer long and have fun with it. So here's different sizing options. 3 feet under is kind of where I like to stick because like I have container gardening on my front porch. And so I like them to stay small, all the way to Jerseys and Legacies, which can get over 8 feet. So be aware of what you're buying and what the space you're working with is. This is kind of what our area looks like right now. Outside. Flowering fruiting times, if you're looking to really get that long extending fruited times, pick one from each season. Mid-seasons can pollinate your earlies and your lates. So taste, a lot of people like to pick depending on if it's sweet or if it's bold. I really prefer a sweet berry, and I really enjoy the pink lemonades. It just depends on what you're using them for. Make sure you're going to enjoy it. And some other fun options they've been coming out with lately. Peach sorbet, jelly beans, pink lemonade are literally just pink berries. You think your brain says, there's no way that berry's ripe. And then you taste it and it's one of the sweetest ones you've ever had. And then the Perpetua is really cool because it's got multiple fruiting periods. So you can have a couple different sets on one bush. So they want full sun and acidic soil. You give them that, they'll be happy. Beyond that, they're also very hungry. So if you want a good fruit set, you're going to want to feed them 3 times a year. April, May, June. They also want that consistent watering throughout our drought season. They recommend about 2 inches a week in ground. I know mine in my containers, they are pretty much thirsty every day in the dead of the summer. Mulching very much helps with a lot of different issues. They like it deep, so 3 inches on these guys, and you don't have to worry about rotting the crown or the trunk on them. You can go right up to the plant on these guys. Pruning is essential to blueberry production. So if you want to keep your berries nice and big and plentiful, you're going to want to prune every year, while trellising is not necessary. Do it during dormancy, maybe in late winter, as all the sugars in the plant have had time to kind of go to the roots rather than the shoots that you're going to be cutting off. The most productive branches on a blueberry are going to be on 1-year-old wood with 8 to 12-inch branches. So this is kind of what we want to promote to have. You can remove about 20% of this bush without seeing negative effects. Even then, the negative effect you're going to see is a loss of berries for 1 year. But after that, your bush is going to really appreciate it. They really like a good pruning. So it can seem very daunting. There's a lot to do on a blueberry. So where to start for pruning? This is, you're going to want to cut out the dead, damaged, or diseased wood. That's a good place to start. Then you're going to move on to the extremely tiny branches at the base that look like they're not going to be able to hold a single blueberry on them. Next, you're going to be removing outlying stems or ones that are going to be touching the ground when they're full of berries, or ones that are going to be rubbing against each other, as this will cause physical damage throughout the year that you don't want to have to deal with. The whole goal of it is to open up the center of the plant to help the light kind of penetrate in there and the air circulate. As we're pruning, we want to maintain an equal number of 1, 2, 3, and 4-year-old canes. Imagine age of these branches and canes in size. The bigger it is, the older it is. And generally, if it's over 1.5 inches, just get it out of there, because that means it's probably over that 6 to 8-year-old mark. Young blueberry bushes don't require much pruning, as we want to kind of encourage those new productions. If more than 2 or 4 new canes from the soil pop out, pick the strongest 2 to 4 ones and remove the rest. If you do this every year, that's how you end up with that nice 1, 2, 3, 4-year-old mix. And if you keep up on that, it's more easy to kind of picture. On mature plants with consistent care, you shouldn't have a lot of old canes to prune out. Always prune out bigger ones in that 6 to 8-year-old range, as they tend to be too leafy, too thin, and too weak to really support a good berry system. Again, 1-inch diameter or bigger, just get it out of there. And you can remove up to 20% of that wood. Don't be scared. Just get in there. Your berry plant will thank you in the long run. I've seen a lot of people come through here worried about their blueberries being too small, and they want to rip out their plant and plant a new one. Well, like I said, these guys live to be 40 years old, so they just need a little love to keep up on their production. Prevention is always key. I'm going to drill that into you, if anything. Keep your plant as healthy as possible. Beyond that, you're going to see pests such as bird, deer, and rodents on your blueberries. We're always going to see that. Consider using the shiny tape or the netting to keep the birds off your stuff. You might see some insects attacking your blueberry during growing season. Spinosad is a good thing to use at that point. One of the major diseases we might see around here is the mummyberry. The biggest prevention for that is mulching. So it keeps it out of the soil of your plant. Another thing is treatments. We would consider using treatments of copper fungicide in the dormant season to prevent things like black spot from our prolonged wet springs. Gooseberries and currants are an exciting type of berry that we don't get to discuss a lot. They're kind of short-lived plants, especially comparatively to the blueberry, and they're kind of wild, so you won't see a huge production with these guys. Again, they live to be about 12 years old, which is about that lifespan of a raspberry. They're small plants, and just a fun fact, adjusts to berries across between the gooseberry and currant. We've kind of lumped them in together here because they've got the same growing requirements. They're self-pollinating, which is nice. They're pretty adaptable to light and soils. They're one of the few berries that'll actually produce in a little bit of a shadier region. Most berries want that full sun to produce. These guys you can get away with less light. They're also adaptable in soils, however, they will like a little bit more acidic. The happier you can make them in terms of sun and soil, the more production you'll get. They're really going to want consistent watering throughout the summer, and they don't need much feeding, just hit once in May. You're going to want to plant them about 6 feet apart if you're planting more than one. Trellising is not like a blueberry, and pruning is very much, trellising is not necessary, but pruning is very much like a blueberry. They're going to be sending up new canes from the base of that plant, and you're going to want to thin them out to keep an even number of the 2 to 3 year olds. An important note for harvesting is the black currants can kind of be jostled off like a blueberry. You just kind of touch them and they'll tell you they're right by jumping off the plant. But the whites and the reds are very sensitive. Darren recommends cutting off the whole branch to then take them inside onto a table because they will just fall everywhere. These guys struggle a lot with rust and mildew. We recommend using a preventative yearly spray of the copper fungicide on them. And always be aware of buying disease-resistant varieties, which the ones we carry are going to have some of that disease resistance. The black currants in particular have more issues. And with this disease, this rust can be spread to other pines like ponderosas and shore pines. So it's around, it's not something you can kind of prevent because it's on our plants and out in nature. The best thing you can do is try to prevent it with a healthy plant, use the spray, and buy disease-resistant varieties. Pests are not a big concern in this area. Grapes. Grapes are fun because they're extremely heavy producers after they mature, and they're pretty easy to care for after they mature. You don't really have to mature or like fertilize these guys even after they're mature. They are self-fertile, and in the Pacific Northwest, we can only have certain types because they love hot, sunny summers, which our summers are labeled as mild climates. So you're really going to want to give these guys as much sun as possible. You might see them divided into 3 different types, European, American, and the hybrid between the 2, but we're gonna just kind of gloss over that. Here's different varieties you might see here at Chenard's. Pay attention to seeds or seedless and what you're going to use them for. If you're going to do fresh eating, you got to be aware if there's seeds. They love full sun, love that heat and sun. So south facing in our area is generally ideal. They want their soil to be well drained. They are a little susceptible to root rot. And then you're going to want to plant them about 6 to 8 feet apart and be prepared to make a long-term trellis. They need that support. In addition to this, be prepared to prune them every year. They need it for production. You can take about 90% off the plant without seeing any issues. We'll get into that a little more in a second. Mature plants don't need to be fed. It is optional to feed them with high nitrogen in the spring. but Darren told me he hasn't fed his for the last 15 years and it produces amazing. Watering is not essential in the Willamette Valley, although you might kind of want to supplement during the drought season to kind of really give a good ripening set of bunches. Trellising is the big deal. Trellising, pruning, big deals on grapes. You're gonna want your trellis to be pretty reliable. It's gonna have to be very strong. People like to use a T-shape post, but really they can be grown on anything. There's one in my neighborhood growing over the patio of a neighbor's, like the driveway. So you're going to want to train the young plants. It's going to take training. You're going to want to favor one vine to go straight up to create that nice trunk that we see, and then remove all the other shoots. You're then going to top it above the desired heights, and this will promote it to create those nice branching arms that we see them have. The next year, you will train these new shoots out along the trellis and remove the out of place vines. You won't see fruiting canes until like 3 years in. So there's many different pruning methods, but you can remove up to 90% of last season growth on the grape. You're going to want to develop these rejuvenation points where these plants will grow the next year. Thin to about 1 to 2 canes at each point and cut canes back so that you have 3 to 4 buds on each cane, creating about 12 to 24 per plant. It's not, it doesn't have to be an exact science. You don't have to be totally sure of what you're doing. You can take 90% of that plant back. It's just going to be appreciative that it got a haircut. Pests and diseases, birds, raccoons, and possums are going to be interested in your berries. Insect pests are usually minor. Best leaf mites and bunch rot is best controlled with winter dormant sprays, so we might recommend a preliminary spray or just spray if you're seeing issues. The most prevalent issue is just mildew. Copper and sulfur in the spring on newly emerged growth helps get rid of that as we go into growing season. You see this issue a lot with like cucumbers and stuff where the mildew bunches on the fuzzy leaves. It's very similar. Kiwis are very easy care plants with large growing vines, extremely heavy producers, so your trellising system is going to need to hold like 150 or more pounds. They're pretty cold hardy, but their shoots are sensitive in spring, and if those get damaged, you might just ruin a whole crop for the year. There are 3 main types, the hardy, fuzzy, and arctic, and they bloom at completely different times, so you have to be aware of which type you're purchasing. They live to be about 30 to 50 years old, but they like a good hard pruning each year because the best production is on those 1-year-old branches. The very interesting thing about kiwis is they require a male and a female of the same variety to pollinate. Like I said, each of those 3 different types open flowers at very separate times. So you need a male and female of each type to be able to pollinate each other. 1 male can pollinate up to 6 females. There is the exception of self-fertile plants, which kiwi does have some. You just got to make sure that it says self-fertile on it. We would recommend not buying some self-fertile and some male and female. Pick either self-fertile or male or female. That way you don't have to worry about what's going on. They take a little bit of a time to mature. From the ones we sell here, you're going to see about 5 to 7 years before they actually start fruiting. Here's some varieties you may see here at Chenard's. The fuzzy kiwi is the kind you see at the grocery store. and it's pretty easy to take care of. One that we're pretty excited about is this Jenny at the very bottom, which it's a fuzzy kiwi, but it's self-fertile. Finding a self-fertile fuzzy kiwi has been very difficult for us, but we're expecting to see some soon. They're gonna want full sun with well-draining soil. They're gonna want a little bit of shelter from extreme wind and cold spots. So if you have a windway on your property where you know the wind just comes howling through, maybe it's not the best place for your kiwi. Ensure that you have the correct pollinator plants. They are, like I said, a little tricky with their pollination. You should have a male and female of the same variety. They get quite large, so plant them about 10 feet apart, and they are very hungry and thirsty as they are huge producers. Fertilize April, May, and June, and water through the summer, as well as mulching. They are going to require a strong trellising structure. You will see similar growth and trellising practices as grapes. They're going to look pretty similar, or they can if you want them to. And pruning is going to look very similar. You're going to train for that single trunk, but on these guys, you're going to prune right below the top wire so the new shoots can kind of come out of that and follow the wires. The best production is on 1-year-old branches, so you're going to want to remove up to 70% of the new growth during dormancy. The cool thing about kiwis is there's not many issues associated with them. The biggest problem is rodents. They can mean death for your plant because they like to dig out at the bottom. Consider protecting the base with a strong barrier, like a sleeve, or even keeping the soil bare around your plant because these rodents don't like to cross the bare soil to leave their protected areas of the grass. So it kind of stops them from playing in that area. You might see some mildew and root rot issues. Root rot probably from a cultural issue from not planting it correctly. Preventative sprays for these is not necessary. And if you see an active pest infestation, it can be treated with spinosad, but really you're not likely to see much. Raspberries are very productive. They have very specific site needs as they have some disease issues. You're going to see about 2 to 3 pounds per foot of raspberries. They spread pretty good. And they live about 10 years. They're in that Rosaceae family, the rose family, so you're going to want to keep them away from your roses, away from your strawberries, away from your blackberries. They're usually self-fertile, and they are a little more confusing than the rest of the fruit to kind of understand. So I'm going to try my best. So there are 2 types of canes on these plants. The primo cane, which is the first year growth, usually vegetative. And then the flora canes, which is the second year of growth, which is where the fruit usually produces. And then they die after they produce their fruit. So raspberries can come in 2 different forms, which is the everbearings. They get their name because they can have 2 different fruiting periods, and they can fruit on those primo canes that are usually vegetative. And then summer bearing, which only fruit on their flora canes only once in the summer. Pruning is going to vary on these 2 different types. Here's different varieties that you're going to see in our area. Root rot is an issue with raspberries, especially with our high clay native soils. So we like to buy root rot resistant varieties, but Cascade Delight is particularly root rot resistant. So it's always a good option. You might at any given point see these here at Chenard's. They're going to want full sun. They like our maritime climate, so they like when we have a moderate summer. So they get a little stressed when we hit that 103+ drought heat. So they're going to want pretty consistent watering during that time to help get through it. However, they want well-drained soils because they're sensitive to root rot, which originates in the soil when it's got too much moisture and the bad bacteria is able to thrive. They're very hungry and thirsty. You're going to want to feed April, May, and June. They like slightly acidic soil, but there's no need to use acidic fertilizers in our area to acidify because our native soil is like about the right pH. We recommend planting about 2 to 3 inches apart.
Inches?
Yeah, I'm honestly, I might have messed that up. Here it says it right there. 2 to 3 feet. Did we finish pruning? Or planting? Yes, we did. All right. Trellising and pruning. Pruning is very important on raspberries. Trellising is kind of optional. Trellising is usually just to keep the plant upright so that it doesn't flop over and get damaged on the ground. So if you're trellising, we would recommend doing it at shoulder height and as well as at knee height to keep them kind of contained, keeping it simple. So first we're going to get into pruning the everbearing type. The everbearings are the types that can fruit on their primocanes and their floricanes, meaning they can be pruned for either 1 crop in the year or for 2 crops. So if you're going to prune for 1 crop, it's really super easy. It's the easiest way to do it. Cut all of the canes back in March. This is going to allow for only a fall production on the primocanes. It makes things super easy, super simple. For 2 crops that year, you're going to want to remove spent floricanes after they fruit in the summer. And then come fall, top the sections of primocane that put off their fruit. So the floricanes are going to fruit in the summer and the primocanes are going to fruit in the fall. So you're going to cut the floricane, you're going to cut the floricanes after they fruit in the summer, and then you're going to tip the primocanes in the fall because they only produce fruit on the top bit. So you're going to tip where they produce that fruit because it's going to try to die off the tip anyway. And yeah, so that's how you get 2 crops. Hope that made sense. That's the hard part about the pruning. For summer bearing varieties that only produce 1 fruit once a year, 1 set of fruit once a year, you're going to only remove the dead spent floricanes after fruiting in the fall. This is going to leave the newly grown primocanes to then become floricanes and fruit for you again next year. You can tell the difference between primocanes and floricanes pretty much by looking at them, as the primocanes are going to be nice green and healthy and robust, and the floricanes are going to be a little large, leggier, and they start to tend to brown and look a little more sickly. So again, root rot is one of the biggest issues with raspberries that you will see. Consider mounding up, like I suggested earlier. This will help the water run off and keep the feet from getting saturated. Other disease issues you might see can be prevented with winter dormant sprays. Birds are the biggest animal pest you're going to run into. They love raspberries. You can use deterrents or barriers. As for insects, one of the bigger ones is the cane borers for raspberries. They like to bore in the canes during dormancy. You can kind of see your cane become a little pregnant where they've bored in. But with routine and proper pruning, you'll prune them right out and it won't be an issue. A bigger issue is crown borers. Not necessarily for raspberries, they're a bigger issue for blackberries. If you see these, it's time to throw the whole plant away. We'll get a little more about that into that for blackberries here in a second. So blackberries, they're very vigorous, but they're not, the type we sell here at Chenard's are not going to be invasive like the Himalayan blackberries we find everywhere. They're very productive. They have a short fruiting period. Trellising is needed because they get quite large. There are two main types that affect pruning and training, which is the erect and the trailing. Another interesting fact about blackberries is their root systems are about a 10 by 10 size. They have huge, massive root systems. So when you're fertilizing and when you're watering, you kind of want to spread it out a little further than you might normally. This also creates added challenges for trying to do them in containers because they just have such massive root systems. Again, they're part of the rose family. They're self-fertile. They're pretty dang tolerant of different locations, sun types, and soils. They've got very similar growth structures and to raspberries in terms of the florocane and primocane. They live to be around 20 years, and you can see up to 15 pounds per plant. They're very hungry and thirsty. So again, you're going to want to feed and water routinely. While they're less demanding than you might see the raspberries or blueberries. So the main differences between the two main types of erect and trailing. Erects are good in colder climates. They're more seedy, they're less productive, and they're smaller berries. So we don't tend to see them in our climate as often because of these negative attributes. They're mostly just for like the eastern side of Oregon where they can't grow these trailing blueberries because the trailing, more productive, more well-behaved, they're more sensitive to the cold, but they've got bigger harvests and you'll see them a little later in the season. Marion is our most popular trailing variety here in Oregon. Then you might see Boysen. Hall's Beauty and Columbia Star are newer varieties. I believe they've got some disease resistance to them. And Triple Crown is a semi-erect. It's pretty popular on the east side, and it's very, very delicious blueberry. Or blackberry. It can get huge though. It can overtake houses in the way, like it'll. It's not gonna spread that aggressively, but it will just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. They can get over 8 feet tall, and then as they're sending up new canes, they're just gonna get wider and wider. So I just heard a story from someone the other day where they planted one too close to their house and it just started growing over the house and they just had to rip the whole thing out just because it was way too massive and vigorous. However, the berries are the biggest blackberries I've ever seen, and they're so juicy and so flavorful that I'm almost considering risking. They're my favorite blackberry, hands down, for taste, not for care. So they're gonna want full sun. They're pretty hungry and thirsty, so feed April, May, June. They can handle a wide variety of soils, but they're gonna prefer that 5.5 to 7 range, so just slightly acidic. Trailing, you're gonna want to plant further apart in that 6 to 8 foot range, while as erects, you can get as close as 3 feet. Trellising prevents damage and keeps things neater and easier to harvest as they've got massive thorns on them usually. They're hard to kind of stick your hand in to pull berries out. So trellising makes this a little easier. We might consider making these lines at 6 feet as well as at 4 feet. The erect varieties will require summer as well as winter pruning. You're going to want to top them at 4 feet tall in the summer. When they're about 4 feet tall in summer, you're going to want to remove that top 1 to 2 feet. And this will encourage lateral branches to start coming out. And you're going to want to shorten those to about 2 feet as well. For trailing, they're a little more intense because they can get up to 20 feet vines that you kind of have to manage. So we recommend to train your fruiting floricanes to wrap around a trellising. And then as your new primocanes begin to emerge at the bottom, just kind of run them along the bottom of the trellis and let them grow along the ground. And then come the end of season, when it's time to rip and cut out the floricanes, you'll then take those primocanes and wrap them around where your floricanes were so that they can become next year's floricanes.
So is the black raspberry treated like a regular blackberry? I mean, if it's a raspberry, it's labeled as a black raspberry.
I believe,
as its own.
yeah, I believe the black raspberry is treated like a blackberry.
So you pretty much cut them off then.
The old ones after they fruited, yeah, because they're gonna die them. They only live for 2 years, so that after they fruited on their 2nd year, they're doomed for death anyway. So just cut them out and then put your primos up on there.
Okay. And it's okay to do, excuse me, but it's okay to do it now, because I haven't.
Yes, yeah. Now's a great time. You might not see a whole lot of disease or animal pest issues. Again, just use dormant sprays or deterrents and barriers. The biggest thing for blackberries is this crown borer. It is a very serious problem because they live in invasive blackberries and unkempt raspberries. And because our invasive blackberries are so prevalent, there's just no way to manage this. There isn't. So if you've got invasive blackberries surrounding your property, you might catch one of these. Once you have one, consider the whole plant dead, throw it away, pull it out and burn it, murder it, get it out of there. It's done for, which is incredibly irritating because these plants can live to be 20 years old. This is evidence of what you might see on the plant when these guys move in. And this is what an adult looks like. Kind of like a bee, but not. So yeah. I wanted to provide these. I got those pictures of that crown borer from the Pacific Northwest Handbook, which is an incredibly great resource I'd like to tell people about. You can just Google Pacific Northwest Handbook and it'll help you identify pests and diseases on specific plants in our area. I really love Oregon State University as an option to turn to because their information is specific to our area. It doesn't get any more specific than that. And we are always here for you at Chenard's. We have YouTube chock full of these presentations as well as additional videos that we go out of our way to make. You can always give us a call, send us pictures, emails. We love to help you guys figure out what your problem is and fix it and get it. We like to mitigate issues and see you guys be successful. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are your pot of gold at the end of the rainbow to help you get your plants healthy. So, thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions, I'd love to take them, or if you want to talk further about something.
So we have both Concord grapes and a table grape. And the Concord ones are prolific and we never seen it in seeds. The table grape, they're huge leaves that by, let's say late July, August, they get kind of bubbly. But I don't see anything underneath. They're just not smooth like the other grapes. Is that it?
I think that is sign of a rust. You may want to do like a preventative copper spray. Or like a preventative spray as they're starting to burst their buds.
Well, Tom usually sprays all of them, so we're just wondering what that, why they were acting so different.
Yeah, maybe we might want to reach out to Darren. Maybe he'll have a better answer for you.
By then it's like,
You know why you can't have concrete grape shipped already?
I would imagine it's
I just
got,
had to throw a pine in locally and then last year. And everywhere, a lot of places sell them, you know, outside the state, but they're not able to ship to Oregon.
yeah, I would imagine it has something to do with like a disease or a pest transmission. I don't think we've seen Concords either for a while, for a minute.
that's where we got ours here.
From here?
Several years ago.
Several years ago, yeah, I don't know that we saw, I don't think we've seen them this year. Someone asks, is there a recording of this? It will be uploaded to YouTube. So if you missed anything or you want to look back
Thank you.
or look at some other classes we've done, everything's on YouTube. All right. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate you. The turnout was pretty good.